the help you need and you got to wait for that, then it becomes a bigger problem down the line. So it's not necessarily saying we got to break the law, but sometimes the law and necessity outweighs the laws that are in place for us today. And, just super honored and privileged to be able to have people like Liz and Topper here, I'll hand it over to them in a bit, with Stormwise to kind of address, how we deal with mold. It is a daunting task. It can be a daunting task, but it is our hope that the tools and the things that they're going to be here to offer to you folks will help you get through this. And, just because we end this meeting today at whatever point, it doesn't mean that we're not still here to kokua and kako and help down the line. So, everybody being on here, we already have all of your contacts and emails. Always feel free to reach out to, either one of us with Lahaina Strong folks or even with Stormwise. I've lived with mold most of my life. Or not most of my life, for a period of my life in Volcano. And if you are not on it, it's gonna get on you, you know. So, um, and this is not to fearmonger anybody either. Mold can be a serious issue, but it can also be something that is easily taken care of if you have the right tools for it. And we're not here to fearmonger, make anybody feel more scared than they need to be. But at the end of the day, we got to take care of community. And the way we take care of community is making sure that we're doing things the best way we can, the safest way, and, um, keeping our people home in their house. But with that, I will now pass it over to our Stormwise Ohana, Hopper and Liz. They've put together an amazing presentation. They've answered a lot of the questions that were sent in, and yeah, we just want to give them the floor now. They have a lot of very cool, important things for everybody to hear. So, mahalo.
Yeah, mahalo right back. Thank you, Pale, and the whole Lahaina Strong team. You've been a fantastic partner in preparing for this, and I'm looking forward to the honor that's before me and this opportunity to share. Stormwise exists to empower leaders like yourselves with disaster knowledge, so you can do it yourselves. We're well aligned in our intent here, and um, we recognize that many people on this call are going to be coming from uh, different knowledge bases and different perspectives, and we're going to try to approach all of them, right? We don't want anyone to feel left out, and we don't want anyone to feel like, oh, they missed the introduction and they're coming in late to class or something. So some of this might be a little rudimentary to you. Just give some grace to the people who are just kind of wading in from the shallow end. And then some of it might get, pretty in depth for those of you who are already like gung ho and you're into it. We're going to try to address, all of that. And we also recognize some of the things that were already said. This can be scary. It can be overwhelming. It will likely get frustrating at some points. You've probably heard conflicting information. We want to try to bring resolution to that so it's not so bad. And I'm hopeful that by the end of this, you will feel like a lot of those things have resolved. Specifically, some of you have already shared questions. Some of you might come up with questions and share them in the chat. And those questions might get answered either in the program that we've already developed, or we can answer them specifically at the end. So if I'm going over something or Liz is going over something, you're like, oh, I really wanted to know about that. You can write it down. You can come back to it and you can put it in the chat. And hopefully, if it's not addressed in what we provide in like about 40 minutes or so, we can maybe address it at the end. We want you to feel like you are being heard. So, as we shift now to getting into this webinar, I want you to think of it as um, us presenting options for you to take next steps. It would be simpler. It would be simpler if we just picked our favorite way and we said this way is the only way and everyone has to do it our way. That would be simpler. However, it would probably be cost prohibitive because ways to eradicate mold cost money and time, and not everybody has money and time. And we want to recognize you have to come at this, from your own resources and from your own perspectives. And doing something is better than doing nothing. Uh, and you can figure out, you can take what we present and you can figure out what's going to work for you. We don't want to say this is the only way. So you should hear, some options in this, and one of them hopefully will fit for you. Now, that said, um, I should say again that Stormwise exists to empower leaders, right? We are a 501(c)(3) nonprofit, and that's what we do all day, every day. We are not mold specialists. There are people called mycologists. I've just learned this. Mycology is the study of fungi, and mold is a fungi, and you can get a degree in that. You can take lots of classes, lots of tests, and you can become a mycologist, and we are not one of those. We are also not medical doctors. We cannot make um, recommendations for your particular health. We can talk generally about how does mold affect health. We will do that. Um, but you should consult your doctor about your health. And we are not mold remediation specialists. However, we do have friends who are doctors and who are mold remediation specialists, and we've consulted both of them for preparation of this webinar. So it is somewhat indirect that you'll get those perspectives represented here, but we are not those people. And then you might be asking, well, then why are we listening to you? I would ask that question. If I was you, I would ask the question, like, what qualifies you to give us any information? Uh, I'll give it an attempt at answering that question in a satisfactory way. Um, Combined, Stormwise has about 35 years of disaster experience. Your flood, or series of floods, are my 55th disaster. And of those 55 disasters, 52 of them involved water and therefore mold. So I've been dealing with mold for a lot. This is my 21st year of doing disaster work. So mold and disasters go way back with me. A lot of exposure to that, and seen remediation done well and seen it done poorly, and I can speak to that. Liz would probably not tell you this. She's lost her home 3 times in different disasters. She's been through this as well, and those disasters involved water and mold. That aside, let's just say Liz and I didn't have any experience professionally. We live in Louisiana. We live in the part of Louisiana that is swampy. It is hot and humid and wet all the time, which might sound very familiar to some of you who live in those kind of climates on Hawaiian Islands. So there's that. And that means that we deal with mold kind of regularly. In fact, I pulled out a drawer where I live, and my leather belts had molded, and I actually put them in a Ziploc bag to show you. I'm not sure if you can see, but I have black belts that have turned green because of mold. It's a regular problem that we battle with, right? So there's professional and there is personal battles with mold that we're talking about, and that should give us enough information to share with you that will be useful. So with that said, I want to go to let's get into it. And uh, we recognize that some of you may have been eagerly awaiting this webinar, and you are ready with pen and paper, and you're going to take notes. And thank you for that. Some of you also might have your camera off and your mic muted because you're making dinner. And this is just, you're trying to absorb as much as you can. And so you need the high level. And we respect both of those positions. So let me give you some high level guiding principles. These will be themes that you can track through the presentation and take with you later. Um, the first one is that there are multiple effective ways to treat mold. There's not just going to be one way. There are also multiple ineffective ways to treat mold. So we don't want to do those, but we're not going to give you the one way. We're going to give you a spectrum and you can choose. We think that you are intelligent, resourceful people. You can figure it out what's best for you. The second one was already mentioned. Time is unfortunately against you. We're almost at 2 months after the first flood. That is a lot of time for mold to grow. And I can almost guarantee that there have been ideal conditions for mold to be growing in this almost 2 month period. So if we're just starting to deal with this, we really need to move to action quickly. We understand that you're going to have to think about it. You're going to have to talk with people about it. You should check everything that we're saying against credible sources. You might want to consult your doctor. You might want to call your insurance company. You might need to fight with your insurance company. All these things take time, but it can't be that another month has gone by and nothing has happened. We're going to urge you to move and to do something. Lastly, you can do this. We haven't met, we don't know each other, but just in Stormwise's experience working with communities who've experienced floods, people who have no construction background, no mold remediation background, they have been able to do this. This is an accomplishable task. We want to empower you with the perspective, experience, the knowledge. You can run with it. You can do this. We have every confidence of that, especially when you're doing it together. So those are things to take with you throughout the rest of this. And if you need to get back to making dinner, I hope it ends up turning out good. So we'll dive in with the first slide about specifics. And this is what is mold and why should you care? Obviously, you care. I mean, you've gotten on to this webinar, or you're watching the recording, and at least I think you would have a notion like, maybe this is something that I should deal with. So you already care, but a bit more depth about why you should care is there are health concerns, around mold. Not all mold. I mean, penicillin is derived from mold. We want to keep that one around, right? But I can guarantee you don't have penicillin growing in your walls right now. You have some toxic things to be concerned about, and understanding more of the risks will maybe motivate you to take certain actions. So at the very outside uh, chances of where this could go, death is a possibility. I've read that consistently. I've never seen it or heard of it. Apparently, it is a possibility. It's a remote possibility. I don't want anyone going home thinking they're going to die. You will not die tonight or next month or next year. That would be a very distant prospect, but I should mention it because if you ignore everything and you have pre-existing health conditions, it would complicate things, right? Typically, a mold exposure it will not alone kill somebody. There will be another comorbidity, to use a COVID-19 term that came into parlance. So if you have serious health concerns because of cancer or heart disease, emphysema, autoimmune disease, if you're already battling something and now you're dealing with another level, which is mold, it might push somebody over the edge. More commonly, much, much more commonly, what you will experience is adverse health effects that look like they might come from other things, right? Chronic headaches, a shortness of breath, elevated heart rate, difficulty sleeping, itchiness. These aren't things that are unique to mold. You can get a headache from lots of things, right? But these are symptoms that generally lower your quality of life, and they become chronic. They can become noticeable. Maybe they become a concern. To the point that you would go to a doctor, and we would absolutely recommend that you get medical advice that are from actual doctors, not just me and Liz. So, I personally know three people who had mold exposures where they inhaled mold spores. The mold took root in their lungs, and there was a colony of mold in their chests, and they have chronic health problems. That's not that's not common, but it's also near enough to me that it's real, right? I don't know anyone who's died of any mold exposure, but apparently that's possible. I had to mention it, but very rare, right? So uh, it is also possible that you would have a chronic condition because of mold exposure that's not lethal. I think mostly it will be irritating. So that's why you should care, right? Especially if you have young people, developmental age, they're just growing their lungs out. We want to be careful, more careful with them, or people who are in the aged community and are kind of looking at their golden years. Understanding what mold is will help us battle mold. So again, not a mycologist. I'm just a normal guy who's done a bit of research. So, basics of mold are that it is a living organism, and living organisms want to reproduce and grow. That's the bad part. The good part of it being a living organism is that you can kill it. If it's alive, you can kill it. It can die. And once it's dead, then it doesn't cause you problems. So, we're going to talk through how to do that. So, one of the ways to understand how to kill it is understand what it needs to live, which are three things. So, a mold spore would need a place to live. Usually, it's porous. I'll talk about what I mean about porous in a moment, but it needs a place to live that's porous. It needs water and it needs heat. Those three things, and you'll have mold growth. So, uh, the heat is going to be the most difficult for you to battle because I don't think there's anywhere on any Hawaiian island that gets cold enough for long enough for the mold to die. If you lived in Minnesota, northern Minnesota, you would have a serious winter where most mold would die, if not all. I don't want to like, I'm not a mycologist, so I don't know how many molds there are and how many would die because of cold, but most cold of that length of time would kill mold, and you don't have that. So that's going to be a hard one to fight. The water and the substance that it lives on, those you can fight. Water initially caused the mold, right? You either had intrusion from above or below, but there was a significant amount of water and it kicked the mold off into um, a growth spell. And now the mold doesn't need that much water to keep living and to keep growing. It can live off of the humidity in the air. And unfortunately, many climates on Hawaiian Islands would have that level of humidity. Obviously, where I live, I have that level of humidity. So that you can fight. We'll talk about that. And then the things that mold grows on are usually, but not only, porous. And what I mean by that is often porous materials are organic materials. They were once something that was living. So, for example, wood was once a tree, and that tree would siphon water from the ground up to its leaves. Those structures are still inherent in wood, cardboard, paper, uh, those types of porous substances make it easy for mold to grow. If you look at the hand-drawn picture of mold on this slide, it's rough, right? I didn't do it, but like it's pretty accurate, I'd say, compared to the photos I've seen. Uh, it basically has spores in a cluster up top, and it has something that looks like a root, which is actually called hyphae. Don't ask me to spell it, but it's essentially mold roots. And the mold roots love to infest all those little porosities so that they can suck up water. Uh, if you think of this more like a flower, that might be helpful because flowers have pollen and flowers have roots. And if you're allergic to flowers, you're probably allergic to the pollen that gets into the air. And once the pollen's in the air, it's really hard or impossible to see. Similarly, Once the mold spores get into the air, it's impossible to see. You're breathing it. You're breathing mold actually right now, multiple types of mold in any atmosphere. Some of those might be hazardous to you, but mold is naturally occurring. Mold spores are all around. We breathe mold every day when we're fine. However, if you have water intrusion from a flash flood, that's going to feed the kind of mold that you don't want to be breathing. So, mold spores in the air, mold spores in a cluster, and roots. If we only address the flower in the flower analogy, if we just like cut the flower off at its base and we leave the root system and the root system still has access to water, you're probably going to get another flower. You have to kill all of it. The mold spores in the air, the mold in the cluster, the mold's roots, you have to kill all of it. And so we're going to talk through how to do that by attacking the water and the substance that it lives on. So uh, that's an overview of what mold is at like a probably a seventh grade level. I don't think, we're getting that deep into it of the mycology, but you need to understand the basics there so that we can be effective in treating things. I won't get too much further into that, but I'm going to hand it over to Liz so she can talk you through, okay, if we've decided we're going to go after this thing, what do we need to do to protect ourselves? And you'll hear from me. I'll chime in. Liz will, chime in, and we'll keep this active. Liz, you can go ahead with the next slide.
So I want to go back to something Topper said. I have personally been affected by, well, I've lived through multiple disasters, but I have had my house affected in a very negative way 3 different times. One, I was a child, I was 6 years old. That was a flood. The second time, and I believe it's relevant here, the second time was water intrusion after a hurricane, but it was flood waters that came into my home, and it wasn't a lot. It was maybe an inch of water that came in. And the part of this story that I think is relevant is or maybe helps understand the situation is that we had bought the house 2 weeks before that flood. So we had closed on the house 2 weeks before, and many people don't know, and I didn't know, that your homeowner's insurance doesn't vest for a month after you buy the house. So I could not go apply for insurance. So we were left in a position where we had to figure out how to deal with it ourselves. So much of what I'll be sharing is personal experience, hard fought personal experience, also colored by experts and best practices used in the nonprofit space. I'll use all of that to kind of describe what's going on here. In that situation that I just talked about, it was the bottom floor of my house. There were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom that were affected. That's not the whole house. It was a fairly small area of the home. But we still had to address it. We couldn't just let it sit. And so if you guys are in a position where you're kind of trying to figure out, what do I do here? When we're talking about floodwater, because of the type of water it is, it's not just mop water that's been spilled. We're talking about water that typically has sewage in it and chemical runoff and things like that. You definitely want to address it. For me, it felt completely overwhelming. I had just bought this house. We had just done some minor renovation work to it. We didn't have a lot left over to do any kind of major renovation. And so it was kind of, how do we step forward? What do we do next? I didn't understand the context even for how to step forward. And that's, to Topper's point, that's kind of what we want to do here for you guys. You're smart people. You're capable of making decisions in the rest of your life. And the bit that may be missing for making good decisions in this realm is understanding the context. So now you have some context about mold. You'll gain some context about what it looks like to deal with it. But I have walked through this too, and I know that feeling of overwhelm. And I just want to share from the get-go what Topper also shared, is that you can do it. There will be decisions to make, and maybe you call in experts to help you at various points in the process. Maybe you get friends to help you or volunteer groups to help you, but you can do it. You can address it. just take the first step. So moving forward, Tupper has shared a bit about mold, and we all, I'm sure, have seen the Facebook reels. If you guys get sucked into those the way that I do, you've seen the Facebook reels about, mold and how it affects you and things like that. There's a ton of fear, and fear will tend to paralyze you. Please don't be paralyzed. Let's take some steps forward. When addressing mold in a space, the first thing we want to do is we want to protect ourselves. Kind of in the same way when you're on an airplane and the stewardess or the flight attendant tells you to, if they're in the event that cabin pressure drops, the oxygen mask will fall, and that they tell you to put the oxygen mask on yourself first and then on to the children next to you. So if we're going to address mold and address hazardous situations, we want to protect ourselves first so that we can continue to do the good work moving forward. Now, Tupper said at the beginning as well, there are many different ways to address things, and there are some decisions that you will make for yourself about how you will address things. You'll see in this little slide right here, there's a guy in the front, in the foreground, with a helmet on and a respirator on, Tyvek suit, gloves, booties, and if he's doing it right, all of those seams are going to be taped up. That is the full deal protective mechanism for going into a home. And I will share a picture on the next slide that there is a situation in which I would use this type of PPE, personal protective equipment. I personally have done many jobs where I've not gone in at this level. Typically, I'll wear a mask, I'll wear gloves, definitely good shoes. The majority of your risk of exposure, at least in my experience, there are people who have major health consequences. That is true. In my experience, my personal reaction to mold is typically that I'll get a headache first and my face will start to burn. So my face will turn red, just as a bit of a reaction. So that may be your reaction. You may have a greater allergy than I do, and perhaps your skin will burn if it touches. Knowing those things, knowing how your body reacts to different things, that'll be key. But this guy in the foreground, that is the real deal. I'll also tell you about this, though, is that with respirators, you're supposed to have a lung capacity test before you put a respirator like that on. N95 masks are typically approved for the type of work that you'll be doing moving forward. Goggles are a great thing to bring forward. I will wear goggles, especially if I'm working overhead at all, because then you've got particulate matter falling into your eyes. Gloves, good work gloves are a good idea anyway, but when you're dealing with mold, those gloves will help keep that stuff off of your skin. And then a Tyvek suit. In hot climates, Tyvek suits can be very difficult to wear. Just because they get so hot. It's like wearing a plastic suit. So if you want to sweat off a couple extra pounds, Tyvek suit's a great option. It is, I'm going to say it again, it is the standard for how these things should be handled. Most remediation groups and volunteer groups that do remediation do not wear Tyvek suits. So I'll lay that out there. That is your decision to make. I'm going to move on to the next slide. And the next one has that picture that I talked about. In this circumstance, if I were walking into this space, I would be in full garb. This picture is a picture after Hurricane Harvey. It was a flood-affected home that was left, and this is part of our concern in getting you guys moving forward. This is a home that was left for about 1.5 years, and the mold was not addressed. The after effects of the flood were not addressed at all. And you can see the mold up the door jamb. It's on all of the cabinets, all of the walls, it's all over. That house, because it wasn't addressed, everything in that house now has to come out because it's all now had a chance for mold to grow in it. We're going to advocate for you guys starting now so that you can limit the effects in your space. Whenever you start moving forward, so you'll see like just the quick run through kind of on this left-hand side. My goal is to leave you with keywords for next steps. You can do this. It is important to take a deep breath. Once you've made the decision that you're going to step into this space, you can step in a couple of ways. You can do it with a contractor. There are mold remediation experts, people who are paid. ServPro is one of those. They have certain certifications. They have ANSI, IICRC, S5200, and S5000 certifications. That's water intrusion and mold remediation certifications. We don't have that, and you don't have that, but there is still work that you can do. Topper talked about dealing with insurance, and I just shared with you that my insurance did not cover the water damage in my first maybe the first time I was an adult and had to deal with it. The second time, however, I did have insurance, and I had to fight insurance to get anything to happen. And one of the things I'll say about that is, even when you're dealing with insurance, you have the right to stop the damage from occurring. So you can go in and limit water intrusion into your home. You can pull out old materials. Just document everything from the beginning. Okay. Moving on. This is another thing to consider. So if you've had floodwater intrusion into your home, you guys are not at the point yet where you would have seen that first picture, right? Where mold is everywhere. What you may have seen, however, is something that looks like this. Your wall, maybe you see some spots or something like that. I want you to be aware that just because you see it you don't see much on the outside, what's on the inside could be much worse than what's on the outside. And the reason for that is, like Topper said, what mold needs to grow is it needs heat, it needs water, and it needs organic material or porous material. Inside your wall, it has those things in spades. Insulation, wallboard, all of that, even the wood framing, is all porous organic material. There's plenty of heat, and once floodwater has intruded and water makes it into that wall cavity, it has plenty of water. It's very difficult to dry that wall cavity, even while running dehumidifiers in the air. Now, I will say it's a bit different. Topper shared about his home. I currently have a bathroom that has a mold issue where I have a dehumidifier running nonstop just to try and pull the moisture out of the air. That can be slightly different because that surface, the surface of the paint is affected at that point. Water that makes it into the wall cavity and flooding looks a little bit different because you can't see where that water's getting. Now, if you let mold grow on the surface long enough, it's going to get inside the paper. That will become a problem. That's something that you've allowed to sit. Floodwater is a bit different. It's toxic, like I already said, and it gets inside the cavity just because it's floodwater, and it makes it inside the wall. So know that just because it looks safe on the outside does not mean that the inside is safe. The standard for mold remediation is, if floodwater has gotten into it, you need to remove it. There's a lot of emphasis placed on the chemicals that are used, and chemicals are part of the process, but they are not even the main part of the process. The main part of the process is removal of the source. So removal of that water affected porous material, whether it's a couch or a carpet or underlay under hardwood floors, or underlay under click-lock floors. Click-lock floors can be cleaned, but the underlay, that foam padding, that cannot be cleaned. It has to be taken out. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking through the things that have been affected.
Liz, before you move on, can you go back to that slide?
Oh, sure.
I think most people will have figured this out, but the piece of wall with all the mold on it on the right is the piece of wall on the left before it got taken out. That's the same piece of wall. It's just the
Yes.
outside and the inside. So I just wanted to make that really clear to people.
Yeah, that's good. See, I'm going backwards now. Sorry, guys. So we've made the decision. It's been affected. We know it needs to come out. So what do we do next? The first thing we want to do is we want to consider what we're about to walk into. I've given you a project timeline here, but it's really important to remember that timelines are affected by the availability of both resource and people. And it's also affected by how big the project is. If your floodwaters were 8 feet, you're dealing with a different project and a different timeline than if you got 6 inches of water in your home. And maybe you got 6 inches in 2 rooms. That's a different timeline. So we have given you just kind of an estimated timeline, assuming that we're working with 3 or 4 rooms of a home instead of a whole home or a large affected area. A contractor timeline is going to move much quicker because you're dealing with experts who move with efficiency. They operate a bit differently, as you would expect. Volunteers can be effective, they're just typically slower. And the availability of volunteers and the availability of contractors shift based on different things. Volunteer groups will come in sometimes cyclically. Sometimes you've got great community around you and people want to share their time, but maybe they only have the weekend. So that just delays that timeline a bit. So definitely want to make sure that you're aware of how long it takes. Now, much of this timeline is taking up in drying stages, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. Okay, we've made the decision. We've kind of figured out what the timeline is. Our next step is to assess what's going on. Many people talk about going in and doing an assessment of the home. You can assess your home and you can start to discover where the water was. I did see in a lot of your questions that some people were talking about water that had come in under a sliding glass door, or maybe like a leaky roof. And so there were some patches of water. Just identifying those spaces is the first step. If we're talking about floodwater, you want to try to figure out where the water line is, or the scourge line. That's where like the debris kind of hits on the sheetrock, or on the outside of the siding of the house. You want to kind of figure out where that is. And the reason you want to figure out how high the water was in your home is because then it will help you make a plan later for how much wallboard to take out, how much to open up and air out. So we're going to look for water lines. If you had a mass of water hit your home, it is possible that there could be some structural concerns. If you see anything hinting in that direction, you're going to want to get experts to help you there. Also, if electrical outlets were involved, you'll want to get an electrician to take a look and make a plan there. Next step is to make a plan for how you're going to do it. If you're doing it yourself, are you going to do one room at a time? Are you going to move everybody out, or maybe live in unaffected rooms and go from there? You want to know what you're working with. You'll also need to consider permitting in your area. There are different permitting constraints. In Louisiana, if you're doing it yourself, you don't have to pull permits. It will be different where you are. And so just being aware of the way that operates will be key. And then you want to make sure you've got your tools and materials just to keep the timeline moving as quickly as possible. Next step is to begin the muck out work. Many of you have already done this. This is kind of clear the mud, clear the debris out. That is the logical next step. And so if you've already done that, you can disregard this. And again, I'll say this is floodwater focused. It's not really like leaky roof focused. The mucking part is debris or water affected furniture, water affected porous items. You want to get all of that out. You want to have a clear work environment before you take a next step. So that is your muck process. After that, we start to tear things out. Now, this is the part where people feel like maybe they're nervous to step into it. And I'll say it again. You can do this. My daughter, while she was in the 8th grade, led a group of 14-year-old guys from New York City through this process in a home. So you can do it, just with some key understanding, a basic understanding of how the house is put together, and then adapting to some tools. Before you begin a tear out, you want to seal the space. And the reason for that, again, is that we want to keep all particulate matter into one confined space as best we can. Seal off an HVAC if you can do that. You want to seal your openings. And we'll need that later on when we dry things, but you also want to keep all dust and debris out of other spaces of your home. So seal the room, You're going to begin removing the affected materials that are part of your construction. So things like sheetrock or wallboard or gypsum board, whatever you call it. Remember how we identified that water line? We're going to go 12 inches above that water line and remove there. And the reason for that, again, is that it's a porous material. It will soak water up into the gypsum that's inside the board. So we want to go, yep.
Let me jump in. Not because you didn't say it well enough, you said it perfectly clearly, but I think it's such.
What the? Oh,
Sorry? I was getting an echo.
No,
Am
no.
I?
Somebody was unmuted real quickly, but they
you're
muted.
good.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Liz, you said it well and you said it clearly, but I just think it's such an important point that another voice should say it. Before you start tearing stuff out that you think has mold in it, you want to be sure you contain that. Because like I said earlier, the hazardous part of the mold are the spores in the air. And as soon as you start tearing stuff, you're kicking mold spores all over the place. So you could effectually create another mold colony somewhere else in tearing out the mold colony you can see. So we don't do that. All right, go ahead, Liz.
We definitely don't want to do that. So in the tear out, anything that's porous, we're talking about wallboard, we're talking about cabinets, carpets, floating floors. Now, if you've got a floating floor, like a click lock flooring that has a pad underneath, you can save the click lock flooring. It's difficult to do, but you can do it. If budget is a concern, you can save it and clean it, but you will need to remove the foam pad that would be underneath it. Doors, many times doors are press board or have hollow core. And so you want to, those will be affected as well. You want to get those out. One of the key things that our demo friends tell us is that if you're going to take out the door, you need to take out the door frame, because you can't buy a door without a door frame. They don't ever quite fit right. So take the door frame out as well. You're going to want to work. And I did see, because of those pictures that you guys sent in and questions that you sent in, some people had roof or ceiling damage. You're going to want to work top to bottom, inside to outside. Start at the top, pull down from the top, and then you can begin, like, just move your way down the wall from there. As you work, you want to keep your workspace clear. So as you bring things down, you're going to begin to bag them up, and you're going to take them either to the street if they're still getting debris removal, or put them in a dumpster. Keep your space as clean as possible. It will limit injury, and it will keep you moving efficiently. That is key. This is a very big job. It is messy. It is dirty. Sometimes it helps to take a little bit of frustration out in the process. Sometimes it's like, dreams fulfilled, or maybe fun to see the inside or inner workings of things. There are positive perspectives to hold in the middle of this, but many times the emotional effect of watching things come apart can be strong and negative. So watch for that in yourself, and if you're helping your community, be watchful of that in the people that you're working with, and in the people whose homes you're working in, and take time with them if need be. That's a key component. This is a big job, but it is worth it. Removing the source is key component of dealing with mold. And all of that porous material is one of the sources. Once the wall is open, though, once we've torn out, we get a chance to dry. One key thing to say, and I'll say this again later, is that cleaning up your debris in the process is also important. So vacuum cleaners, sweeping, things like that, you want to get all of that, the dust out. Once the wall is open, now our walls can breathe, and we want to bring in our fans and our dehumidifiers. The goal with fans is to create kind of a cyclonic action, moving the air through the space so that the dehumidifier can actually take moisture out of all of the air. Otherwise, that dehumidifier is likely only going to take moisture out of the air that's just right near it. We want it to pull moisture out of the air, because the air is going to take moisture out of the framing members that are existing in your walls. And our goal here is to get the moisture content of your framing members under 17%. This is one of those spaces where you'll find people make different recommendations. Our friends who work in mold remediation say that they want to get it below 12%. The chemicals that we suggest you use, their labeling says under 17%. The lower the moisture content in the framing members, the better that wood will soak up the chemicals that you're going to treat it with later to kill the mold that exists in it. So as low, but however, because many of you are in humid climates, it's difficult to get that moisture content low. So keeping your room sealed is part of it. Otherwise, your room's just going to bring humidity from outside, and you're just going to keep running into that high moisture content. It is important that you run those fans and dehumidifiers until you get it dry. Sometimes that can take 3 days. Sometimes that can take a week and a half. If it's rainy outside, it's definitely going to take longer. So just keep that in mind, that this may be one of the most frustrating pieces, because you got to wait a while before you can take the next step. Once you get your moisture content under 17%, we're going to move on to cleaning and treating. We want to, yes?
You want to tell people how they can know what the moisture content is?
Sure. I was going to address, I will address some of the materials that we use later on, but in this case, it definitely makes sense. Thank you. A moisture meter is a great way to test the moisture content of really material in your house. Lahaina Strong has a moisture meter. A moisture meter can be purchased from Home Depot for about $50. There are a couple of different kinds of moisture meters, and I will recommend that you get a moisture meter with 2 metal prongs in it. Those 2 metal prongs are inserted, or like they pierce the material you're testing. So if you're in a bathroom or you're in your home, you don't want to just touch the paint on the outside. You actually want to pierce into the gypsum. Or if we're testing cabinets, you want to pierce into that cabinet and let it read the moisture content. And it will tell you. Many times after a flood, you'll get readings that are, sometimes it'll peg out and just say high. Other times you'll get something in the 23, 24% range. All of that is too high. Our friend who works in mold remediation said, I have 0 issues getting insurance companies to agree to remediation work with a moisture reading of 20%. He said there's no pushback at that point. So it's definitely a concern when your moisture content is at that point, and I've seen it higher. So that is how you would test to see where your moisture content is. Once you've got an idea and you're down below that 17% or lower, you want to begin to clean and treat. You want to clean the studs. You want to use a vacuum with a HEPA filter on it, because that's going to catch that particulate molds, those spores that Tupper was talking about. You want to sweep and make sure that there's no particulates left. It will also, just from a mental, emotional perspective, cleaning up that debris will help you to feel better about the space that you're working in. If it is your space, knowing that it's clean like that just helps you to exist in that space and feel like there's hope for the future. I don't know why that is, but many people have had that experience. Many homeowners have had that experience. In this process, you'll see that I have put Concrobium or Shockwave. Those are the 2 recommended, approved products that are used for treating molds or mold remediation. There are many other products that you will hear about. People talk about vinegar and bleach and borax and lots of other things. And there are a number of ways, like there are 2 components to treating mold. You want to clean it, but you also want to prevent its regrowth. Concrobium and Shockwave are the ones that are like EPA approved for this purpose. Concrobium is a low or no VOC option. Shockwave definitely has some chemical, some noxious fumes and things of that nature. Concrobium is considered a greener option, and the greatest effect that I've seen from Concrobium is just that it is an irritant to skin. So it's not that the fumes are irritating, it is just that if you get it on your skin, it can cause a little bit of irritation. Or if somehow you aerosolize concrobium and breathe it in, it could cause some irritation in your breathing passages. So I would, wear gloves and wear a mask, and you can go apply. Once it's dry, it offers, at least according to my research, there are no ill effects once it's dried. When you're treating with concrobium or shockwave, you want to spray it on those framing members to a level that coats it, because it encapsulates that mold, which means it kind of creates a capsule. It creates a film that covers it and keeps it from regrowing. So when you're applying it, you want to spray it to a point where it begins to bead up. You don't want to create a new moisture problem and have puddles on the floor, but you definitely want to coat the parts that you're treating. Shockwave is another option. Concrobium comes in a gallon. The gallon is about, I think, on Maui, it was about $46 a gallon. Home Depot has it. Shockwave is about the same cost, but Shockwave you have to dilute. And so if you don't want, and it's got some fumes and some greater health risks associated with handling it. Both can be gotten at Home Depot, I believe. I know for certain concrobium can. But if you don't want to have to deal with the diluting and getting everything just right to make sure that you're treating things as you should, concrobium will work. There are other products. Like I said, bleach, vinegar, there are many other things. With those things, however, none of them are approved in the same way. So I'm always going to say, go with the product, go with concrobium, go with shockwave. However, if you can't afford the concrobium or shockwave and your options are don't do anything or use borax and simple green, use borax and simple green, or use bleach. If that's all you've got, do it. But they are not going to be your best option. I think I've said that a couple of times. I want to be really clear about that. There are lots of ways that you're going to hear to treat things, and definitely do your due diligence and research, and ask if you've got, friends who do mold remediation, ask them as well. These are going to be top choice products. And I don't think it really takes all that. If we're doing floodwater and we're doing small spaces, it's not going to be a major cost burden to you to use these products. So use them if you can. However, if you can't, please use something. Once you've sprayed the products down, I'll move on. Once you've sprayed the products on your wood framing or your wood doors or whatever it is, you want to go back to the dehumidifiers and fans and bring that moisture level back down in your framing members. So it's just repeating that dry step. We're coming in, we're going to dry it out again. Once it's dry though, I'm going to move right on to the next thing. We're going to verify all the things that we checked before. Is there any other place that water can get into the home? If there is, we need to address that before we try to close any walls. In the case of my home, the third time, a tree fell on my house, and we hired a contractor to come in and gut the house for us. And then he told me he was going to spray. At the time, I didn't know what that meant. I now know that because the roof was never closed in, the spraying that he did was really kind of worthless because there was still water. So because he never cut off the source, the chemicals didn't do the work. They can't do the work alone. So this is why we're going to verify that everything is as it should be. We check the envelope, meaning the walls, the windows, the roof. Is all of that good? Are we still allowing water in some way? If we are no longer allowing water in, we're going to check the moisture content just to be doubly sure. If it's under that 17%, then we're good to go ahead and close things up, bring back the wall insulation, hang the sheetrock. Sheetrock hanging is a difficult process to do. Well, the hanging really isn't so hard. It's the finishing sheetrock. I don't know if you've ever dealt with that. That is really hard. It is tedious work. It is messy work. So just as a tidbit, a note that if you're having to remove parts of your walls, I said earlier to go 12 inches above wherever a water line might be. I'm going to make a recommendation from experience and from friends with experience that if you have the ability to go 4 feet up, because 4 feet is a whole sheet of sheetrock on its side. And if you're using a whole sheet, the edges are so much easier to finish. Jagged lines in sheetrock make for more of a problem while finishing. In the case that you have to be really budget conscious, you can do less. Just know that you may have more trouble finishing those edges. And sometimes a contractor, if you're hiring a contractor to finish, they may have a little bit, they may charge you a little bit more because they're going to have to make so many cuts and deal with those ragged edges. So we've closed things up. We're kind of moving into a new stasis at this point, and this is where we will leave you on our little journey through remediation and dealing with things. There were questions asked about things like mold testing. Mold testing is a very expensive process, and sometimes it is required. If we're landlords and we've got tenants, if you're trying to sell a house that has documented mold issues, they may require a mold certificate. There are things like that where it is required. However, if you're going to be working with a DIY swipe test kit from Home Depot or Lowe's, those may not give you the best readings. If you know that you've been affected by floodwater specifically, or large inundation, or you've had a large inundation of water, the swipe test may only tell you what's on the wall. It cannot tell you what's inside the wall. Professional remediation experts are going to come in and they're going to do air samples, and they're going to do swipe tests, and they're going to take them to a lab, and they're going to evaluate them. The little swipe test it can give you a false negative, and it can give you a false positive, because mold spores exist in the world. They're in your house right now. They're outside right now. You can take any air sample outside, and you're gonna find mold spores in it. So just note that if you've had water intrusion, your safest bet, your best bet, is to remove the things that were affected, the porous materials that were affected. This little QR code right here is going to give you like a quick reference guide for those steps that I just talked you through. It's not the in-depth stuff. It's just that quick, assess first. All of that. There's also a list there of materials or tools that are helpful when you're doing this kind of tear out process. We can also dump a bunch of other resources there. If you let us know that you've got other concerns or things of that nature, we can definitely address those and give you more information. My email and Topper's email are down here at the bottom. If you want to jot those down, we can probably just throw them in the chat for you as well. So I hope that we've been able to share some next steps with you. I think many times after a disaster, people feel alone in the difficulty. Like if it's your house, you're like, I don't know how to address this. I don't have enough information. My hope, I believe Topper's hope, is that we've given you a little bit more information to know how to proceed. Even just how to have the conversation with even a mold remediation group, to know what they're talking about, or to know how to ask the right questions. If you have further concerns, please send us emails. Please know that you can do this. You can take the next step forward. And then once you do the first one and you feel accomplished about that one, maybe you can help somebody else do theirs. I think that we have some questions to address.
Yeah, I mean, I have some written down from what were submitted when there was a registration, and I'm sure there's some more that have come in. I've seen some more in the chat. I just wanted to make reference before we get to the questions. On that slide that was just up with the QR code, there were some photos. The photos were taken in Eel Valley a few weeks ago, when we did an impromptu version of this mold training, like this mold remediation training, because we came in response to the floods. We were looking for something to do that would be helpful. A mold remediation seminar was seen as that helpful thing, and there were some folks who showed up and we trained them. And so if you are on Maui or you know these folks, you could go and give them a call and say, hey, how was that for you? What was your perspective? And perhaps that's a more friendly and relational way to get some of your questions answered.
They did have the benefit of having a bit of a hands-on experience, which was
Yeah.
kind of fun, kind of eye-opening. And I think it was definitely confidence boosting. So they may have a little bit of leg up on you guys and may be able to share a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the participants represents a larger population that I've seen over the years that I've done this, who seemed like she might have found her calling in life. Like she got really into it and had a lot of fun. Maybe too much, but this doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. This could be, something that was life-giving for you. So we've got some questions
I
that.
think
And real quick.
I think Jordan has some.
Or this is something totally different, you're starting something totally new.
Okay, I'm gonna go real quick. I just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Thank you, Stormwise, for putting on this amazing training for us. I do want to offer that if you are on Maui and you want to get a little bit of support, these volunteers that did the hands-on training on Maui, they are able and willing to come out to you folks and just kind of support you through that process because they've kind of went through that training. So please just reach out personally if you are on Maui and you're interested in these volunteers coming out to help you detect if you have mold and kind of help you help walk you through that process. So that's the first thing. And then I just wanted to start us off with the first question, and we got it a few times. And so folks are wondering how they can advocate for themselves, if they are experiencing mold in their homes.
Wow, that's of all the questions, that's probably the most difficult one to start with. And I would just be really cautious in answering it because I don't know. I know enough about Hawaiian culture to know that it can get complex, and you know, one um, one incident or one event can domino effect. And I wouldn't want to be unscrupulous in answering the question, but anyone should be able to advocate for themselves. Documentation of mold would be critical in that because I don't think that generally our American culture understands what mold even is, right? Probably most people on this webinar learned something today. And in researching for this, I learned things. So you need to have a way to communicate. And pictures are great, videos are better. And that will probably do wonders for advocacy. I wouldn't want to weigh in on which government officials to contact or which agencies to go submit paperwork to. I don't want to get to that level. I would actually default to some local knowledge sets on that. Liz, did you have anything more you wanted to add?
Yeah, so that question of advocacy changes depending on your situation. So it ranges really, really broadly. But I do want to say we are doing this training or this little PowerPoint guided walkthrough, and it is fairly focused on mold, or at least that's the subject matter because it's really an extremely concerning one. But know that dealing with mold, that whole tear out process and rebuild process is a long process, and there are people who are around to help walk you through that, or at least that is their goal. There are resources out there. There is no one solution. So there is no one, to Topper's point, there is no one person to advocate to for yourself, but know that there are resources out there that you can put together to help support recovery as a whole. And that's, that is in your home. It does have to do with mold. And I actually can't think of any one resource that is mold specific. It's usually called disaster recovery or rebuild or something along those lines. So know that those options, those resources exist, and you have a great community and you have great organizations who are helping support you along that path. And I would say maybe many times the thing that gets in the way of moving forward in recovery is that we're afraid to ask for help, or we feel like someone else has it worse than we do. But the truth is that oftentimes resources are made available when there is more need. So greater resource can be opened up if more need is known. So don't be afraid to ask the question, or to say, hey, I actually might need some support as well.
I thought of something else. If it came to a legal issue, there are pro bono nonprofits that are populated or staffed by attorneys. And I don't think it matters where those nonprofits are based, as long as, you can speak the same language that they're speaking, then you can get advice from them. As long as you're willing to get up earlier, they're going to stay up late, or, to accommodate the time zone thing. But there may be some subset that is regional. Like this is a Hawaiian specific law, but mostly these pro bono attorneys are going to speak to a broad audience. They're going to be familiar with lots of states, different regulations and legal ramifications, and they will know. At least my experience with them has been that they know more than anybody. Like they get really laser focused on disaster legal issues. So better than your local lawyer, better than your local state representative, better than, anybody. They're gonna really they know better than FEMA, what's up. So that might be a resource.
Thank you for that. And I really appreciate you folks saying, like, don't feel shame to ask for help, because that is something that we saw here was there was so much different volunteer groups that were interested in coming, but they weren't aware about how high the need was. And so I appreciate you folks saying that, just ask for help, because that helps gauge and then bring resources in. So that's a really good point. If we can move to the next one, we have a question in the chat from Tamira. She's asking if they have to wash all curtains, linens, blankets, pillows, etc.
Yes. So materials like that can be washed well, you can wash them. So if curtains were affected, then you want to wash them. Pillows, I'd be super hesitant about keeping pillows around, because no matter how many times you put it through a dryer cycle, getting the insides actually dry is always a problem. So things that are thick like that are very difficult to clean, you're probably not going to want to keep them. Curtains, clothing, things like that, you can typically wash and get those pretty clean and very dry.
Liz, what would you use as a detergent?
Well, in my understanding, a surfactant is enough to do the cleaning job. So laundry soap is a surfactant. You can use that to do a good cleaning job. And if you get your clothes very dry, then you've removed the source at that point for any mold to grow further. I might do a couple of cycles and probably a really hot dry, but
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so let's go to a next one. A couple of people had questions regarding concrete. But the one I'm reading right now is concrete hollow tile considered porous? They think that they cleaned it, but they're saying they seem like they still have mold on it.
Interesting. So concrete is not mold's favorite place to grow, but it is possible for it to grow on concrete, and therefore it is possible to clean it. And I would not say that you just need to tear out all concrete or all tile. It may be that there was an ineffective agent used in treating the mold, or it could be a level of user error. Um, People who tend to be across the board and beyond the question here, but like across the board, people who tend to be more meticulous, rule following, scrupulous, like those are going to be people who are better at eradicating mold than people who are like, it's good enough. Like if you're one of those kind of people and you know it, you need to make friends with the people who are really meticulous and have them, get involved. So just know your strengths and weaknesses.
I think also it's important to call out that when you're dealing with tile, sometimes there can be like mineral residue that shows up in grout or something once it's gotten wet. That is not necessarily mold. So just be aware.
Thank you for that. Okay, let's move on. How do we know if our kitchen cabinets have mold underneath them? We had 3 to 4 inches of water in our home. Remediation did put holes in the bottom of them and put fans to air out, but at that time, the moisture levels were still at over 19. How can they check to know for sure?
Yeah, it's very common that cabinets become a place that mold grows. And I don't think there's a way to accurately tell if mold is growing there without opening something up. That means being somewhat destructive. Now, maybe you can choose a spot that is easily patchable and not very, visual in your home, but that is an ideal place for mold to grow. And if you have suspicion, I would encourage you to go find out for certain. And that means, being more invasive.
I would also agree with that. I think many cabinets are pressboard, and so that is going to wick moisture inside the cabinet material, and that is more likely a problem. If you have hardwood cabinets, you can actually remove them, like just take them out of their place and make sure that that area is dry and very clean, and then you can clean the wood underneath. The issue with cabinets is you have basically a false bottom in the cabinet, which provides a space that is pretty close to airtight where water has been. And even if you drill holes, how do you get circulation inside there to get airflow moving? So it's a bit of a gamble. If you want to be super safe, I mean, if you want to wait and see, you can wait and see. But if you want to be super safe, I would say move those cabinets and get under them. And perhaps I don't know what your cabinets look like. The older style cabinets, I have a very old house, and in my house, I could just cut the bottom out of the cabinet. Like I can open up the whole bottom and then put a new bottom in when I'm ready. So it
I want
depends.
to take the opportunity of this question to say something on kind of like a broader scale, because this question could be applied to, well, what about, my bathroom, and what about this, and what about that? Um, the the thing that you want to consider is, if I'm wrong, how expensive will this get? Right? Because likely, whatever the case is today, if the mold is growing, it's going to be exponentially more mold later, which means exponentially more cost. So you really want if you want to know, you need to know now, and that will limit how much this is going to cost in the end.
Thank you. Um, how many inches beyond where your moisture meter detects moisture on wood floors, click engineered wood, and underlayment would you remove? Would that also be 12 inches around?
Well, the question is a little bit so if we're talking about flood water that has entered your home, that's typically expansive. Now you may have, less affected. So to put flooring back in a space like that, you're going to want to refloor the room. You're not going to want to refloor a part of the room typically. And flood water, so we were talking about walls when I said 12 inches above, and the reason for that is that moisture is fighting gravity. When you're talking about a floor, the moisture is not fighting gravity. So it would depend on how much water was on that floor. Um, I feel like there's a bit of clarification. Topper, you may have a way to answer that one a little bit better than I do.
No, I don't think I do. I was having trouble understanding the question, but the way you answered it made sense to me.
So if it's wood floor and you do have an underlay, which I think was that question, then you're probably going to want, because the underlay is typically connected throughout the room, you're going to want to remove the floor in that room, remove the underlay, and if you can you can clean and reinstall the wood floor, then that's an option. However, if it's not an option, you may want to refloor that room.
Right.
Thank you. The last one that I see in the chat as of now, what is the most effective way to close off the area you are working on from the rest of your house?
Yeah, great question, and it gives me a chance to champion this idea again. You can buy some very thin plastic sheeting at any hardware store. I would think somewhere around 2 millimeters is a thickness that you might find on this plastic sheeting, and find some adhesive, a tape, painter's tape if you care about what the walls might look like, duct tape or Gorilla Tape if you don't, and you want to, drape out a small enough area that you can work in and that you can keep isolated, and this, let that drape go all the way to the floor, and maybe if you wanted to enter and exit that space easily, you could overlap so that there's kind of a doorway, or you could slit it from the bottom. But that's a good way to contain, a good enough way to contain the mold spores.
Another little tidbit to add is if you've got HVAC vents in that room, you're going to want to tape those off as well.
Yeah, it gets very expensive to clean HVAC for mold if you don't do that. If that was the last one, there's a few that you have one more?
One more that just came in, and then I was trying to ask the flooring person if they don't feel like they got an answer, if they wanted to maybe come off mute and give you
Oh
that
yeah.
context. So I'll give her some time if she wants to do that. But we did have one more come in on the chat. Roof tiles gone, got wet though, tarp on it, but inside of attic wood is very, very furry. Does anyone know how to do this in the attic?
Oh my. Yeah, I mean, the same concepts can be applied up there, except for the draping of plastic. I think the first thing you'd want to do is make sure that the roof is sealed. You have to limit the water source, and a a tarp will not be the final seal of that envelope, if you will. If you think about a house as an envelope, the roof is part of it. A tarp is not going to be the ultimate solution there. Um, Getting into the framing members of a house in an attic is more difficult than getting into walls, because usually there are angles that are tight, and getting circulation in there is a challenge. The same things would hold true, that you would want to go through the whole process that Liz had walked you through, use the appropriate chemicals, wait for the appropriate moisture content, and then go about sealing it back up.
You would also, when you're dealing with moisture from above, you need to evaluate every subsequent surface below that. Because if water has come in from above in a typical attic, you've got insulation, you've got wood. So if the wood's furry, you've got insulation. If it's gotten wet, then it has to come out. If the wallboard below that, or if there's plywood or beadboard or whatever it is that's below that, you want to evaluate those things too. If it's beadboard and it's solid wood, you can address it by cleaning it and scrubbing it and doing all the things we talked about with framing, but insulation would definitely need to be addressed.
Thank you. And then, okay, I think her name is Mareva. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but she would like to come off mute and give you folks more context for the floor.
Sure.
Hi everyone. Thank you so
Hi.
much for holding this meeting. This is really helpful. I'll explain my situation a bit better. I actually live in an apartment building, and the rains were so strong that they entered my apartment through the sliding glass door. It's unclear whether they got through between the door and the track or under the track. So I'm having a really hard time understanding how the water entered, or perhaps there's a little bit of wall on the sides of the glass door where it attaches to the other concrete wall. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that right. So I don't know if moisture got in there too, but I've been borrowing a moisture meter, and about 4 or 5 feet in to the apartment from the lanai door, it reads, it has read up into the 30s. Now maybe it's in the 20s, and then it, gradually gets down to 7, which is probably the correct moisture percentage. And it kind of formed a U, like the moisture entered 4 feet from the glass door, but also kind of went around the sides. So it kind of created this U shape. So not just at where the glass door is, but on the 2 side walls, are the areas with the highest moisture, like the border. So I'm guessing my floor, first of all, is not solid wood, it's engineered wood. So is that something that can be salvaged and cleaned? Because the bottom of it's like a particle paper, I don't know, paper. That's one question. And then the other one is because I have that same floor all over this apartment, it's not a very big house. The idea of removing one room means removing like the whole apartment. So my hope is, maybe I just need to remove part of it, and part of that underlayment. But yeah, I hope that's clearer. My situation's a little clearer.
Yeah, it is clearer. I believe you sent some photos that we've reviewed.
Yeah.
So I'm matching your words with those photos. It is a more complicated case than some. Um, I think a level of the complication comes with the permission to address it. If it's not your home, like that you don't own outright, there would need to be a relationship that you have to respect, and maybe that needs to be, really defined on paper so that no one's just assuming things. But if there was permission granted and everyone's okay with this and moving forward, how would you do it? I think you would have to be um, like incrementally invasive. I'm not going to stand here and having seen just a few photos say, "Yep, you got to tear the whole thing out." No, I can't say that. But it may get to that point. You want to just start with as little invasion and test and see. And from what you're saying, I am quite certain that there is more that you can't see than there is that you can see. But how much more? I don't know. And how fast is the mold growing and how fast has it already grown? It's too hard to guess. You'd have to start pulling things apart, and that's going to mess with your life. So it's like, ooh, what a hard one.
So it is a bit of a hard one just for some practical next steps as you're moving. The first thing is to figure out how the water is getting in and stop that. And while you're figuring that out, I would make sure that you're running a dehumidifier, just to make sure that you're pulling, if moisture is, if it was just the heavy rain and that's not something that typically happens, you can address the moisture with a dehumidifier and perhaps some fans, to try and get that moisture content down and again remove the source, right, to the best of our ability for the time being, while we figure out if we're still having water intrusion. If you rectify the water intrusion issue, then I think to Topper's point, you can begin. I mean, it depends on. Oh, I've got a couple of things to say, and my ADHD is running a little bit. But one thing is with the engineered wood, the bottom of that wood is kind of like particle board, right? It's soft and papery. And because it is floor, the water will run further than just what got water on top of it. So those are things to consider. Also, to Topper's point, there is a way to begin to remove slats of that wood flooring and kind of invade a little bit. You can also remove pieces of it by cutting it at various lengths. So not like, let me cut a rectangle out of this floor, but like, let's cut incrementally. One of the things I would consider before you start doing that, though, is there a way, or do you have access to more of that same floor? Because no matter what you put back, even if you put back the exact same floor, it's going to look a little bit different because it's just not been worn. Anything right next to a lanai or sliding door is going to have a bit of, sun washed look. And so when you put in brand new on top of that, it's going to start to look different. And maybe that doesn't matter. It is just something to consider. I do very much understand and respect the fact that it's a difficult decision to make, but hopefully we've given you some steps to take in that process.
Thank you.
Perfect. So I just did like a last call on the questions to come through the chat. We have one more, and then after we answer Elaine's question, we'll move on to the previously submitted questions. So she's asking, should we still continue to run the dehumidifiers after the floors and walls have been removed?
So yes, if you remember, and you may not, and that's completely okay. If you remember, before we're going to run dehumidifiers twice, right? So we want to run when the floors and walls are removed, because you're not removing the framing or the concrete, or you're not removing all of that. You want to dry those things out, those things that you can dry thoroughly and you can treat accurately or effectively. You want to dry those things out. So yes, you want to run fans and dehumidifiers to get the moisture content down below a certain point. Once you get the moisture content down and then you treat, then you run the fans and dehumidifiers again to get the moisture content down again. Once you get there and you pull that moisture back down and you're going to put wallboard back up, you can stop running those dehumidifiers, unless you live in a place like Topper does, where you probably need a dehumidifier all the time so your belts don't mold.
Right.
Yes.
Awesome. So, Kalamai, everybody, I believe we are at time. I just want to respect Stormwise's time because it is midnight where they are. We had originally planned for them to give some answers to the previously submitted questions. But again, I want to respect your folks' time. If there's any that you are like, you want to get the answer out on here, or we could also follow up with answers to them in an email. But totally, however you guys want to do it, Stormwise.
Thank you. Thank you for that consideration. I'm actually feeling pretty good. I know this is way past Liz's bedtime, so I'm going to keep it short. There were only a few questions that came in ahead of the webinar that were unique. We've covered most of the questions that came in the program or in this question answer session. There are two that I can address, and I think pretty quickly, and then we can all go to sleep if we like. But one of those was regarding a shared wall situation. If you live in a condo or an apartment and you open up your wall and there's mold on your neighbor's wall and you want to deal with that mold, but it's your neighbor's wall, how do you do that? There's there's no difference in treating it. How we go through the same process as we talked about already, but that really is their wall. So like you would have to have a relationship and get approval. We're not going to condone you going and working on somebody else's property, even though morally it would be the right thing to do. So you want to get their permission, and that might end up in the realm of a pro bono legal advice situation. So I can't comment further on that one. I just say, be nice, be careful, you know. Uh, and the other question was, what about ozone machines? And it's a reasonable question because I had said previously that once the spores are out in the air, you're breathing them. How do you deal with that? Well, I have an air purifier where I live. Um, that's one way. An ozone machine is another way. And will ozone effectively kill mold spores? Yes. However, um, the way that it does that is through oxidation, and um, it is not specific to mold spores. So it oxidizes everything, including you. So there's a certain level that ozone will become toxic to you when you're trying to remove toxins. So it's like you're gonna kind of um, uh, replace one toxin with another toxin that's not going to be effective. The level at which ozone goes from being maybe permissible to toxic, or it starts to become toxic, is very, very low. So zero point 0.1 part per million of ozone in your atmosphere will be effective in mitigating mold spores. But zero point 0.1, sorry, is that right? Point, no, but 1 part per million, so 10 times that is what would start to become hazardous to us. So you have a very narrow window. You have to be toxic enough to kill the mold and not so toxic that you hurt yourself. So be careful about that. That's how I would leave that one. And those are the two kind of unique questions that we haven't already covered. So that said, I think if we're gonna, if we're gonna like say goodbye and good night, I would say, oh, mahalo. Just has been fantastic. Thank you so much for tuning in, for keeping your attention, for asking the good questions, for giving us the opportunity. We're really thankful for all this, and aloha to everyone.
Yeah, and thank you again for you guys for putting this on with us. Also want to thank our partners, Representative Amy Pruso's office, Hoakamana, our Hawaii, Lahui Foundation, and Hawaii VOAD for putting this on with us. Again, everybody, we will be emailing you folks the recording, and then if Stormwise says we can always also send you the presentation, we can send that as well. And then if anybody didn't get their previously questions answered, we can work on getting the answers emailed to you as well. So again, thank you guys so much for joining us and have a beautiful evening. Aloha.